Hi, I'm Shay.
And I'm Heather.
Welcome to the first video in this series. Today we are talking about conscious relationship. And while many of us have this idea that conscious relationship is about finding the one, meeting that person who's going to complete you, really what this work is about is a connection to self. So even if you're in a partnership, doing conscious relationship work is really an inside job. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
When you do this work of conscious relationship, of recognizing that this myth that we've been taught of there's this one amazing person who's going to come save you and make your life perfect, when we recognize that that's actually a myth and that the work that we need to do is build a better relationship with ourselves, we put ourselves in the most perfect position to actually attract a partner who can meet us on every level.
Maybe you're already in a relationship, maybe you're single and you want to do this work so that you can build something healthy. Perhaps you want to save a relationship that you're in now. Whatever the situation, the good news is that because conscious relationship work really is about your inner work, you don't actually need the other person to do anything in order for the relationship to shift. And for me, that has been one of the most profound pieces of wisdom, because as soon as I realized that I could transform all of my relationships simply by doing my own inner work, I became more free, more empowered, and all of my connections deepened.
But for most of us, we find ourselves caught in these unhealthy relationship patterns. So that might be that there's a lot of anger in your relationship, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, perhaps there's a lack of commitment, or you just don't feel connected or safe in the way that you want to feel in your relationships. Now, this is a result of unhealed patterns, wounds, traumas, and fears that we just haven't learned how to address or be with in our life yet. And by doing this work, you can actually evolve how you feel about yourself and then evolve how your relationships play out.
So let's talk about that for a second. What is a relationship pattern? That sounds kind of ambiguous, and I want to make it really clear and simple for you, okay? So a relationship pattern is something that each one of us carry. Consider it a relationship signature, okay? So every time we enter into a relationship, it starts off really magical. We call this the honeymoon phase. Now, I'm sure you've probably experienced this more than a handful of times. I've experienced this a handful of times. You've probably experienced this a handful of times. So anyone who's been in a relationship has experienced that initial feeling of excitement, thinking that maybe this person is different from all the rest, right? And so we get into the relationship and we think, okay, maybe this person's different. Maybe they're the one. And then as we get closer and we get deeper into intimacy, all of our stuff starts coming back up and we start to think, ooh, this maybe isn't the person, or you're not who I thought you were, or maybe they start to change. Or the other possibility is that the blinders have come off and now you're starting to see the deeper layers. And so this is when all of our stuff, and I mean the things that we criticize the person for in our minds, our own fears of connection, of intimacy, our masks, all of those things sort of start to come up in this stage, and we call this the power struggle stage.
In the power struggle stage, you often feel like the person that you're dating, that you're having this relationship with, is just not the person that you thought that they were. It's as if your rose-colored glasses have been taken off and suddenly you're with this person that you don't actually like. But the reality is that we're just seeing a mirror. We're seeing a mirror of the things about ourselves that we're rejecting, that we've suppressed, and that we're uncomfortable with. Our partners are our greatest teachers, and when we recognize that, we have so much potential for personal healing and relationship healing, but we need to move through all 4 of the stages of relationship to get there.
So when you're looking at your relationship patterns, what's really happening here is that we're going in a loop. And I believe that we're doing this because unconsciously, and maybe even consciously, we want to heal. And so we find these partners who represent something or someone from our past, okay? So we're always looking at unhealed relationships from the past. We carry all of that stuff forward into the present. Now we have a new person, but we have the same pattern over and over again. So they might look different, they might sound different, they might even behave slightly differently. But one thing is for sure is that if you haven't done your inner work, or if you don't accept yourself fully, you might find the same emotional themes running over and over again. What do I mean by emotional themes? I mean, perhaps, like Heather said, you come into a relationship but you don't fully feel safe. Maybe you don't trust the person. Maybe you feel afraid to show all of yourself. Perhaps it's difficult to set boundaries or to speak your truth, or you just feel this fear of connecting deeply. And these are the kinds of things that we can work on inside of ourselves, and we don't actually need the other person to come in and do anything or be anything for us in order for that to shift.
So stage 3 is the dead zone. This is where most relationships go to die. It's like hitting a wall in your partnership and in your relationship that you just don't know how to move beyond. We might start romanticizing other people and thinking about moving on to a different partner, and we just don't think we can proceed.
So most of us are familiar with this point because we get into the relationship and everything's really exciting, and then we start to think, okay, maybe you're not who I thought you were, or we get scared and we want to run away, or maybe they run away. And then if we do go deep into that relationship, oftentimes what happens is we just start to get kind of bored, right? And that is actually a result of not showing up fully. And how do we show up fully? Well, through self-acceptance. So when we want to get to stage 4, which is true partnership, we could call it sacred relationship, we can call it conscious relationship. Ultimately, what that means is that we're reaching a level of friendship, intimacy, connection, and vulnerability with the people who we love. That doesn't just mean romantic partners. I'm talking about relationships, so friendships. We're talking about people that you work with. We're talking about mom, dad, brother, sister. All of these relationships carry potential for you to go deeper into self-acceptance. And so this work is so powerful for you to get to know yourself on that level. And you would be amazed at how quickly things can shift for you when you start to do some of this ownership work. So let's talk about what I mean when I say ownership work.
So taking ownership is taking responsibility for your actions, behaviors, and patterns that are showing up in your relationship that you're just not happy with. So it's recognizing that we actually play a vital role in everything that happens in our life. So rather than looking at our partner and saying, hey, you did this to me and it's your fault and that's why things aren't working, it's recognizing that we actually have a vital role in what is happening between the two of us. And when we take ownership, we actually take our power back. We recognize that we play a part in the reality of our life, and we can actually do something to shift what's happening. We're not a victim to our circumstances, we're actually a player in the game of our lives.
Okay, I want to share a personal story with you because I really want you to be able to see how this plays out in your life. So when I was in my early 20s, I met a person who I thought was different, and the two of us decided that we would get married, and in the end it worked out pretty terribly, and we ended up getting a divorce. But the whole process leading up to it was a lot of chaos for us. Our relationship was very much two people who were deep in their old trauma, not really seeing each other clearly. And this is the piece for us all to look at, is when are we carrying our past into our present? See, we all do this in some way. So we attract a person who really represents somebody from our past. They might represent some of the worst or the most negative qualities. And we think, well, why would I want to bring that forward? But again, remember that we unconsciously or consciously want to heal this stuff, okay? So in my story, what happened was there was an incident where my ex-partner was driving off with some other woman in his SUV, and I was standing barefoot in the middle of the road, and I was crying and I was upset, and all of a sudden I had this flash, and I saw myself as 3 years old again when I was being put into the arms of foster parents and I was being abandoned by my mother. And in that moment, I was feeling all of this flood of emotion, and I was so overwhelmed by this vision that I was having, and how really in that moment, I didn't feel like an adult me, I felt like 3-year-old me. And even though it was really intense and scary to face that, I also simultaneously felt so relieved because I realized that it had nothing to do with him. This was about stuff that I hadn't dealt with in my own past. And that meant that I could get through this without him coming back, without him saving me, or without him validating me in any way. And so this is why the work is so powerful, because not only do we have the power to change our relationships, but we have the power to shift how we relate to ourselves internally. And ultimately, we have to be the ones who show up for ourselves in every moment. And so that is why I love this work so much, and I am a champion for you to do the digging in your own past and look at your own unhealed relationships so that you can transform the way that you feel about yourself.
Yeah, you know, there's so many people that go through our programs, our in-person trainings, our group work, and engage with our content online who just have these huge aha moments where they recognize that all of this struggle that they've been experiencing in their relationships, all of these challenges and hard times are purely a mirror of the past. It's some unfinished story, some unfinished trauma, unfinished wound that they just haven't navigated in a self-healing way. And we're often looking for someone else outside of us to help us to heal that, when really the truth is we have to come home to ourselves. We have to go inward. We have to touch that pain. We have to grieve. We have to feel through it. And then through that, go through the tunnel, the journey that takes us to this awareness that we actually had the wisdom and the teachings within us all along.
Now, one other thing that I want to clarify with you here is that there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. Okay, so no matter how much work we do, no matter how spiritual we think we are, no matter how conscious we think we are, there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. But a relationship in which we have tools and self-awareness is a relationship in which we can grow. And that is really what we want to hold on to. So when you find yourself in a relationship and your mind is telling you, well, this person's just not the right person for me, or maybe I just can't make a relationship work, or I'm afraid that they're going to leave, so I don't really want to get too close. What you want to do is notice the ways that your walls are coming up. Notice the ways that your mind is trying to keep you separate from other people. Notice the ways that you're protecting yourself. But in that, you're actually keeping yourself at an arm's length from going deep into connection and intimacy. So there's always an element of risk that we have to take in conscious relationship. We have to be willing to take a risk and let other people into our reality. And so there's this teaching that says, whoever you're with is the person that you can go to God with. Now, we can call it go to higher power, higher source. All that really means, this isn't in a religious context, is that we can have a self-realization moment in relationship with somebody else. So be careful not to put too much pressure on yourself to achieve some sort of status or level of consciousness, let's say, before you get into a relationship. Because sometimes it's actually getting into the relationship that's going to be the next step for you in your healing. And that's why in our programs, whenever we work one-on-one with people, we started to realize that we really needed to connect people, because so much healing happens when we come together. We start to see that we're not alone. We start to see that the things that we think make us different or broken or separate are the very things that connect us as human beings. And so that's why we stopped doing one-on-one work about a year ago, and all of our programs are group programs now, because connection is really the pathway to healing.
And as Shalina spoke about earlier, it's not just about romantic relationships. So if there's some part of you that's thinking, oh, this isn't for me because I'm not in a committed romantic relationship, or maybe I have no prospects, that doesn't actually matter. You can do this work with anyone right here, right now. In fact, Shalina and I have done a lot of this work together. We ourselves have walked through the programs that we now teach. We ourselves have practiced the processes that we now share with you. And that is how we have done a lot of our own healing work in order to prepare ourselves for our relationships, not just with romantic partners, but with each other, with our friends, with people that we connect with on a daily basis. This work is deeply transformative on every area of your life, especially with your relationship with yourself.
For me, one of the biggest shifts that I made was doing mother work. So I healed a relationship that I had with my mother that was very difficult, very tumultuous, and I never actually did that work with her. I had my partner Ben hold space for me, I had Heather hold space for me, and we did a lot of work around it. We did a lot of forgiveness, we did a lot of self-acceptance work, and today I have a beautiful relationship with my mom, but it took me a long time to get there. And the trick for me was being able to see her as innocent. And in the past, I had a lot of anger at her because she didn't show up for me in the ways that I thought she should. And there was a lot of abandonment in my childhood. And when I was able to get to a place of seeing her as a woman on her own journey with her own struggles and fighting her own fight, I was able to really drop into a place of love for her and see her as myself. I was also able to see all of the qualities that I shared with her and love them. I'm sure you might resonate with this, okay? Many of us have said, well, I don't want want to be like my mom, or I don't want to be like my dad, or I don't want to be like that person. And oftentimes the reason we're so resistant to it is because we actually are a lot like that person. So I used to totally resist seeing any of myself in my mother. And it was a real struggle for me. And I really struggled to love myself fully because I saw so much of myself in her, but I was denying it. So when I did this deeper work, when I was able to see the qualities in her that I possessed, and I'm talking about like some of the darker qualities, then I was able to free up space to see all the fun and playful qualities. And then I was able to really appreciate her for who she is without her needing to change or be different. And that completely shifted the relationship, because when we're in relationship and we expect another person to be a certain way, if we expect them to give us something without having our expectations met, then there's going to be a lot of struggle. So really, ultimately, what we're doing here is we're allowing other people to have their own experience without identifying with it. And that's the consciousness right there, is being able to witness somebody in their process without attaching to it, and also giving ourselves space and permission to embody our full experience without hiding it or holding ourselves back.
So what Shelina was just talking about, her relationship with her mom, the challenges that she was having, the things about her that she was really struggling with, that she actually saw within herself, that's a concept called shadow work, which we're gonna be discussing in our next lesson. So pay attention to your inbox for that next lesson that's coming to you.
Be sure to check your promo tab as well, because sometimes the email gets shipped over that way, and we wanna make sure that you get the next video in your inbox. And we look forward to speaking with you tomorrow.